Hey guys, it's Crystal from livingwithgastroparesis.com, and this is the first in our Ask Crystal series. So I get a ton of email with all kinds of questions, and I'm just not always able to answer each one of those individually. So what I've decided to do is to ask you to submit your questions, and then I'll answer them via video, podcast, blog post, so that the information goes out to as many people as possible. Because while there's certainly personal details and differing circumstances for a lot of these questions, there are also some really common themes. And I know that the information provided and the answers will likely help a lot more people, many more people than the one person who asked. So if you have a question that you want to submit for the Ask Crystal series, you can go to bit.ly/askcrystal. So today's question comes from Melody, and Melody says, I've been diagnosed with gastroparesis for going on 2 years now, and I've been prescribed anti-reflux medications for 3 years. Any suggestions on how to get off of this medication? I'm so opposed to it, but without it, the reflux is so bad. My doctor says the reflux is because of my gastroparesis and is necessary. I love this question, and I have a lot to say about it. Obviously, first, I'm not a doctor, so I am not giving you information to go against your doctor's recommendations. What I'm basically trying to do with this video, with these answers, are to give you information that will help to educate you so that you can have a conversation with your doctor and maybe explore some alternative options if, in your case, like in Melody's, she's not terribly comfortable taking these medications indefinitely. So I actually agree with Melody's doctor in the fact that the reflux is likely due to the gastroparesis, and I'm really glad that he pointed that out, because most people, when we think about acid reflux, and especially when we think about acid suppressing medications like PPIs or H2 blockers, we think of an overproduction of acid. And so for the vast majority of people who are struggling with reflux due to gastroparesis, the reflux isn't necessarily a result of the stomach producing too much acid. It's a result of the acid being in the wrong place. And so your stomach acid is supposed to stay in your stomach. The stomach has tissues that protect it from the effect of the acid. The esophagus, on the other hand, is not protected from acid, and acid is not supposed to be going into the esophagus. That's why when it does, we feel heartburn, we can feel chest pain, and a number of other symptoms that many of us associate with reflux. So the problem is not necessarily, and often not, that the stomach is actually overproducing acid. It's that because the stomach is not emptying as quickly as it should, the contents of the stomach, when you're full and all that food is sitting there in the stomach, it can push up against what's called the lower esophageal sphincter. And this is a muscle between the esophagus and the stomach, and its job is basically to open up so that things can come through down the esophagus into the stomach, and to close so that nothing goes back up. When the contents of the stomach, whether it's food, fluids, or air, so if you have a lot of belching, if there's a lot of air, that can push up against that lower esophageal sphincter, basically kind of force it open, and then the contents of the stomach reflux up into the esophagus. There are also some people who just have weak lower esophageal sphincters to begin with, so it takes even less pressure for the contents of the stomach to reflux back up. But so this is the problem in many, many cases. Again, I'm not a doctor. You should talk to your doctor to find out if this is your case, if this is the problem in your case or not. But in many, many cases, it's not a factor of too much acid. It's a factor of the motility causing the contents of the stomach to reflux back up into the esophagus. So taking acid reflux medication, again, whether those are PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, or H2 blockers, sometimes both are prescribed, either are prescribed depending on what works better for you, those don't necessarily get at our underlying problem. And certainly they will decrease the amount of acid that you're producing, which may decrease some of your symptoms, but not necessarily all of your symptoms, because not all of the symptoms are coming from acid. So there are other things within the contents of the stomach that can irritate the esophagus, that can irritate the voice box, the larynx, even the airway, depending on how far up your reflux travels. So if it's in your esophagus, we know that as GERD. If it's up into your voice box, up into your larynx, and even affecting your airway, it can be called LPR. And there's some disagreement, from what I understand, as to whether these are two separate conditions or just different manifestations of the same condition. But either way, it's more than the acid that affects these particular organs and these symptoms. So while acid-suppressing medications may help some of the symptoms, namely heartburn, that burning that you can get in your sternum from the acid literally burning into the esophagus, it doesn't necessarily alleviate the problem completely. And this is evidenced by the fact that there are many, many people with gastroparesis, I was one of them, who are on double the maximum recommended dose of proton pump inhibitors and still not getting complete or adequate relief from that, because it's not just the acid, it's the actual reflux of the contents of the stomach. So some people have non-acidic reflux, and that can still cause a lot of these symptoms. So while I certainly agree with Melody's doctor that her reflux is likely a result of the gastroparesis, I don't necessarily think that the only way to address this is with proton pump inhibitors or H2 blockers, prescription acid reflux medication indefinitely. These kinds of medications were really intended for short-term use. They're fantastic for what they were intended for, which is if you have an ulcer or irritation in the stomach, shutting down your acid production for a certain amount of time allows those things to heal. And this is for a short period of time, and then they're discontinued, and they're fantastic for that purpose. But really, these drugs were not intended to be used for years, or in my case, a decade, before I got off of the medication, or for some people, decades, a lifetime, basically. And there are a couple of problems with long-term use. One problem that is really concerning to me is the effect that it can have on digestion. So we don't have acid in our stomach for no reason. There's a purpose for the acid that is secreted by the stomach, and that is that it's part of the digestive process. The acid helps to break down the food so that it can be emptied into the small intestine. In fact, your stomach has to reach a particular pH, a low enough pH, right? A level of acidity before it will empty into the small intestine, because that acidity helps to kill off things that are not supposed to move on to the intestines, right? It's supposed to kill off pathogens and those kinds of things. So if we are decreasing the amount of acid that we're secreting into our stomach, we may be further compromising already impaired digestion. And there have been studies on this, and one study in particular that really concerns me is one that was done in healthy volunteers, so people without any kind of gastroparesis, delayed gastric emptying. And after they took proton pump inhibitors, they did have delayed gastric emptying. And it was mild and something that probably would not affect somebody with proper functioning digestion. But in the context of digestion that's already delayed, already slow, I think it's an important consideration. I mean, we're taking out a piece of the normal digestive process, and that can further impair digestion. What also concerns me is that these medications can impair absorption of certain vitamins and minerals, for example, iron and B12. And B12 is a really important vitamin for our nervous system. And of course, our nervous system is a big part of our digestive system. The enteric nervous system inside the GI tract is really what controls a lot of our digestion. And there are a lot of other things that rely on B12 and other B vitamins in our body for proper functioning, but the digestive piece in particular concerns me. And lastly, there was a study just released within the last couple of weeks that looked at an increased risk of cardiac complications for people who are on PPIs and acid reflux meds. And I don't know that we understand the exact mechanism for that, but again, taking drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, is not without risk, and it's not that these drugs do nothing in the body. I mean, they are changing things in the body, and I think it's important to be aware of the fact that they're not innocuous. So with all of those things together, to my mind, it makes sense to look at what we can do to either work with our doctor to get off those medications if appropriate. Again, you need to talk to your doctor. There are some people who absolutely need to be taking these medications. Continuous acidic reflux into the esophagus can cause damage that can be very serious. So absolutely, there are people who need to be taking these medications, and again, that's something you work with your doctor on. But if you talk with your doctor and they agree that it's appropriate for you, if you don't have evidence of acid erosion in your esophagus, if they agree that it may be appropriate for you to try getting off these medications, I think there are a number of supportive practices that we can use in an effort to do that. And even if you are on these medications, if you're not getting complete relief, or if you're taking that double dose, for 10 years I was taking 80 milligrams of Prilosec and or Nexium. That's a huge dose. So there may be other things that you can do in conjunction with that medication to A, either get greater relief, or B, possibly be able to reduce your dose a little bit. So a couple of things I want to talk about in that regard. And the first is lifestyle practices and lifestyle habits. And I think like everything else, thinking about lifestyle changes can sometimes seem really simple, like too simplistic. This is a really significant problem that causes me a lot of distress, and I've been struggling with it so much. I've tried all these pharmaceutical medications, and how could lifestyle practices make a difference? But I have seen consistently in the work that I've done with hundreds and hundreds of people with gastroparesis, and certainly in my own experience, that there are definitely lifestyle modifications that can significantly impact these kinds of symptoms. And the first is a mild to moderate physical activity. Walking, personally, I think is the best thing to do. If you are able to walk out your door, even if you start with 10 minutes, walk 10 minutes in one direction, walk 10 minutes back, and you did a 20-minute walk. And what it does is helps to stimulate the digestive tract. So we're not necessarily just talking about reflux here, right? So you may read a lot of suggestions for reflux, like to stop drinking coffee, to stop eating acidic foods, and I think all of those things are helpful, and I think they make sense. But for people with reflux, as a result of gastroparesis, they don't quite go far enough necessarily. And so when we start looking at how we improve our gastric emptying in general, we start looking at how we support motility in general, that's then going to improve our reflux. Because if we're getting reflux because the stomach isn't emptying, if we can get the stomach to empty a little bit better, it's going to improve the reflux. So that's why I say things like walking, because it's going to help your stomach empty, and that will keep things from going back up. So I think walking is very important. You can do other kinds of mild to moderate exercise. I recommend against really intense exercise, because when you're doing really strenuous, intense exercise, your digestion actually shuts down. So the food that you've eaten is just going to be sitting there, and that's going to encourage reflux. So I'll give you a personal example. I was a runner before I was diagnosed with gastroparesis. And actually, the way I was diagnosed with gastroparesis is because I had really significant reflux, and I had been on all these medications, and it wasn't working, and it was affecting my breathing. And so it was the reflux that tipped off the doctors to test for delayed gastric emptying and gastroparesis. But I had to stop running because the running was really exacerbating the reflux. And of course I was running long distances. So, a short, slow jog, depending on your fitness level, that may not be strenuous to you, right? What's strenuous is going to vary between one person and another. But in general, the more mild, moderate exercises are going to be more supportive of gastric emptying. I also recommend that you avoid anything that's crunching your stomach, because if you do have a weak lower esophageal sphincter, if you do have a really full stomach and so the contents are pressing up against that sphincter, if you're physically, mechanically crunching that area, whether you're doing crunches or Pilates, or other kinds of exercises that are kind of folding you in half that can encourage the contents of the stomach again to be refluxing. So that's why personally, I like walking, right? You're in an upright posture, and you can do it as intensely or not intensely as works for you, and you can vary it by day. So that's the first thing. The second thing I really recommend in terms of lifestyle is relaxation practices. And again, this might seem a little disconnected, but there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that when your body is not in a relaxed state, so we have basically two states of our nervous system. We have what's called fight or flight, and we have what's called rest and digest. So when we're in fight or flight, we're not really digesting, okay? We can't. It basically shuts down the digestive system. And most of us are in fight or flight mode a significant portion of the day, really. I mean, whether you're stuck in traffic and late for work and that's stressing you out, whether you have a doctor's appointment coming up and you're stressed out about that, whether you're nervous about the food on your plate because you're afraid it's going to make you feel sick, whether you're nervous about your reflux because it's just really stressing you out because you can't get it under control and you don't want to take these medications. All of those things are triggering your fight or flight response. It's a stress response. So anything that makes you feel stressed, frustrated, sad, upset, worried, angry, is going to trigger that. And if you just think about how many times throughout the day you're probably feeling that, it's significant. And when that's happening, it's basically shutting down digestion, right? It diverts blood flow away from the digestive organs. We produce significantly less enzymes, something like 20,000 times less enzymes. It's very significant. And the churning motion of the stomach, whatever churning motion you may have, of course, for many of us, it's impaired due to the gastroparesis, but whatever you do have, that stops too. So the more often you can get yourself in this rest and digest mode, the more you're going to be digesting your food. And obviously, thinking about this kind of reflux, that's going to help your reflux, because if you're digesting your food and it's not sitting there, there's not as much content in your stomach to push up and reflux up. So I'm actually going to be providing a lot more information about relaxation and the relaxation response in the future. I've taken classes recently in mindfulness meditation and mind-body techniques, and so this is something that's of great interest to me, and I think it's so underutilized for those of us with functional GI disorders. I think it's really, really significant. But you can start by just, closing your eyes, taking a few deep breaths. It doesn't have to be anything significant. You can close your eyes, take some deep breaths. You can focus on a word that means something to you. You can prayer or saying, anything that, kind of just makes you feel calm and relaxed and focused. And just focus on your breath. Just notice the breath, the in and out, or focus on your word. When thoughts come into your mind, you don't want to attach to them. You don't want to make up a story. So if all of a sudden you feel some reflux while you're sitting and you think, oh gosh, there's the reflux again, you just want to recognize, like, okay, thinking, back to my breath, back to my word. You don't want to go with it. You don't want to be like, oh gosh, there's that reflux again. Ugh, so this meditation thing isn't working and I'm never going to get rid of this, and this is such a terrible symptom and it's probably just going to get worse, and now I have to take this medication forever, and oh, what if something else happens from the medication? You don't want to go down that road, right? So that's what we're trying to do with these kinds of exercises. It's just bring your mind back to the present moment, bring your mind back to your breath, bring your mind back to the word. And the more you're able to do that, the more you'll get into a rest and digest mode. So even, before you're going to eat, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, focus on the feeling of the breath in your body, give thanks for the food you're about to eat. It doesn't have to be a religious practice. It can simply, be a thank you to the farmers. Thank you to the person at the grocery store who sold you this food. You can do a really mindful, couple of deep breaths and gratitude practice, regardless of your beliefs, your affiliations, anything like that. I mean, this is really just about coming into the present moment, coming into a state where you feel good, okay? And gratitude is one of the easiest ways to do that. Again, more on this coming soon, but I just really want to point that out, that this can be a really significant point in getting our digestive system to function as optimally as possible. And so in addition to that, there are some supportive practices, supportive therapies that you might try. Some people find acupuncture really helpful, so you might try that. Some people find chiropractics helpful. There's actually just a post about this on my Facebook page recently. Again, it's not going to work for everybody. That's going to really depend on the root cause of your gastroparesis. You know, if it's being caused by some kind of misalignment that's, you know, messing up the innervation of your GI tract, then chiropractics might help. If it's not, then it probably won't. But so these are some things to consider. Hypnotherapy is actually another one. And so hypnotherapy for functional GI disorders is being studied more and more, and it's been proven extremely effective for IBS. There's a post on my blog. If you just go to livingwithgastroparesis.com and search hypnotherapy, you'll find it. And it's fascinating how effective hypnotherapy is for IBS. And they've not done trials on gastroparesis in particular, but I personally really strongly believe that it could be an effective tool for a lot of people. In addition to that, there are a couple of supplemental things you might try. So there's something called DGL, which is it's from licorice, and the DGL is what you want to look for because there is a component of licorice that can raise your blood pressure, and so DGL has that removed. But these are typically chewable wafers, or you can get it in a powder form that you mix with a little bit of water, and it coats your esophagus and it coats your stomach. So it alleviates the symptoms of heartburn for a lot of people, so that actual burning feeling, because it's coating and soothing, and it also can protect the lining of your esophagus from further acid reflux. So some people use this when they're working to reduce or get off of their PPI medications. And you can find it online, you can find it at Amazon. I will link to it below this post. You can get it at most health food stores. And it can be used in conjunction with reflux medication. So you don't have to stop your reflux meds to take it. If you're taking your reflux meds and you're not getting complete relief, this might be something that helps. If you're trying to get off the meds, you're probably experiencing rebound symptoms. This is extremely common, and one of the downsides of these medications is that when you discontinue them, you typically get a lot of rebound symptoms. So for some people, before I was put on PPIs, I never had heartburn in my whole life. But if I missed once I was on them, if I missed a dose, I had horrendous heartburn. And certainly when I came off of them, I had, you know, horrendous heartburn for a while. So those are called rebound symptoms. And for me, it was determined that I didn't actually need them. I had no evidence of acidic reflux. So I, with my doctor, you know, worked to get off of these meds. But DGL can be really helpful for that. There's another supplement called D-limonene, and this can be helpful for some people. It's actually used in some holistic programs over at Johns Hopkins, I know, in their integrative GI department. It's used for gastroparesis as well. But for acid reflux, it's typically used over a 20-day period, and you take one dose every other day. The mechanisms through which it works, I don't really entirely know, to be completely honest with you. But it's basically a citrus oil, which seems completely counterintuitive for any of us who know anything about reflux, but it, for a lot of people, really alleviates the reflux significantly, usually not forever. So from what I've heard, you know, usually every 6 months or so, it's a treatment that needs to be repeated. But for a lot of people, you know, 10 doses of a fairly natural supplement is, you know, every 6 months is a better option than, you know, daily medication. Again, something to talk about with your doctor. You know, there's definitely information about this online, so you can bring it up and discuss it and see what your doctor thinks about that, but just something else that I want to put out there for you. So those are my suggestions. This was a lot of information, I know, in answer to one question, but I think this is a really important question, a really important discussion to have. I get a lot of emails about this, about reflux and about, you know, whether or not it's possible to get off of reflux medication. I think my takeaway here, my bottom line, is that whether or not you're able to get off of reflux medication, I think it's really important to understand what the reflux means, like where it's coming from, because once you understand that for most people, not for everybody, there are, a small percentage of people who do overproduce acid, but it's honestly a small percentage compared to the amount of people that are on acid reducing medications. For most people with gastroparesis who are struggling with reflux, it's probably more a factor of the motility and the gastroparesis than an overproduction of acid. And once you understand that by really targeting your gastroparesis management plan, by really working that gastroparesis management plan, you are also working to improve your reflux. And I just want to kind of reiterate, I think it's been clear throughout this answer, but when I'm talking about a gastroparesis management plan, I'm not just talking about the typical diet and drugs approach, because that approach really doesn't work very well for most people. If it did, there wouldn't be so many people looking for help and answers. What tends to really help is appropriate medical treatment, absolutely. Dietary changes, which if you don't have Eating for Gastroparesis, the new edition that came out in 2014, I highly recommend that resource. It will take you step by step through everything that you need to know about the gastroparesis friendly diet, but also lifestyle modifications, which we talked about, two important things: relaxation practices and physical activity, exercise, but also sleep, things that we might not even think about, like socializing, relationships. I mean, all of these things really play into our stress responses, right? So stress management and our stress responses is a huge part of it. And then these complementary therapies that I mentioned, in this case, something like hypnotherapy might be really effective. In other cases, like I said, acupuncture, chiropractic care. And then complementary therapies in terms of supplements or holistic remedies. The DGL, excuse me, that we talked about here, the D-limonene, as well as other things for gastric emptying, like ginger and those kinds of remedies, which you can find a lot about those on my website and in other videos that I've done. But I just want to make it really clear that we're looking at a comprehensive management plan here. And the comprehensive management plan includes all of these things. And that's going to help improve your gastroparesis symptoms, which in turn, for a lot of people, is going to help improve your reflux symptoms. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it was informative. Again, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer, you can go to bit.ly/askcrystal. And you can find tons of more information over at livingwithgastroparesis.com.